Mr. Hornbuckle,
Mr. Lee.
welcome. You dress the part of the cowboy hat. I think if I ever see you without a cowboy hat on, I may not recognize you.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I like to wear this at conferences. It's kind of a good branding exercise. So because it's how you stick out in a crowd, right? So
Is it has it always been a signature look for you, or was it something that you kind of like thought about?
I got invited to someone. My lawyer of all people gave me tickets to the Cattle Baron Ball,
Hmm.
which apparently is some high end. I'd never heard of it until I got the tickets. And so like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I went out and bought some Western gear, and then
Yeah.
Yellowstone started becoming popular, and here we are. So
Well, it's a good look. It's a fitting look. I've got cowboy hats and all that, but it always feels like a costume for me when I put it on. So I have to find the right context for it, but it suits you, man.
if I go to like a heavily cowboy place, I don't dress like a cowboy. I only dress like a cowboy when everyone else is dressed like a business
To
person. So
stand
I was
out.
just zig and zag. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. You wore it in Chicago when we were there for Brain, I think, right?
Yeah,
The conference. Yeah,
you
it's
stand
like
out in Chicago and
totally.
in boots and
Yeah,
a cowboy hat. Yeah, for
yeah. I
sure.
was like, there's my man, Loe Hornbuckle. Good to talk to you. This is actually officially take two. So I wanna cue that up for our listeners that there may be pieces of that audio that we bring back. I really love that time getting a chance to see not just your place of business, but to just hang out behind the scenes. We don't actually in our profession we don't get to see each other's like personal lives. We don't get to see the art, on the wall, which we're gonna definitely talk a little bit about the art in your house. But it was really cool. Thanks for inviting me to be there. It was cool to see the Low Hornbuckle sanctuary.
How's the dog doing? That's, I think, the
Yeah,
important
I
question
see.
that everyone needs to
That's
know.
true. We adopted the dog right after, so I was heading up there to adopt our dog, and thought, man, I'm within a couple hours of seeing Lo, so we made a whole trip out of it. Oakley is here. She will make an appearance during our interview today,
Okay,
and we'll bring her back up so she can run around the ranch a little bit.
sounds good.
Um, let's start with you have a very unique dementia care organization. I would like to think we do here as well in the San Antonio area. Could you share a little bit about for listeners who don't know you? Um, I don't know how they wouldn't know you, Lo, but tell us a little bit about your organization, what you do within that organization. Let's get a little bit of context.
Yeah, so Sage Oak was started in 2015, and we were just, I think probably just kind of initially just a residential assisted living
Hmm.
type of model, and so we eventually we started off in 2015, and then we were remodeling, just regular large homes, and we were designing them with an ADA architect to make them assisted living homes. And the really interesting thing is I got into memory care for a very unusual reason, which is that my mentor that was training me on this, you could do 10-bed facilities in Arizona, but you can only do 8-bed facilities in Dallas.
Mm.
And your labor profile was effectively the same. So you had the same expenses, and house prices in, say, Phoenix and Dallas were pretty comparable at the time.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I need to do something unique to be able to drive revenue and not just be plain Jane assisted living,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
my mentor's model. And so I actually started in dementia care for financial reasons, and then it really grew to understand that that was really our passion. And we do offer assisted living at Sage Oak, but I would say that something like 80% of our clientele is dementia care focused. And
Yeah.
so we kind of graduated from these 8-bed homes. We had a portfolio of 6 at one time in the Dallas area. And these are in like really prestigious neighborhoods and zip codes. And then started developing a campus or a neighborhood
Hmm.
in which we have multiple 16-bed homes. We kind of took our 8-bed concept, doubled it in size, and then started developing. We have an 80-bed campus, which is comprised of 5 16-bed homes in
Hmm.
Louisiana. And we have the one you visited, which is 6 16-bed homes in Denton. And so we just wanted to take all the great things about small, intimate boutique settings and then give them the scale to where you have everything that you need,
Hmm.
which is so common in the traditional kind of 100-bed,
Yeah.
all under one roof facility. So we really want to create this permutation of the best things of both. And so that's
Yeah.
really been the design that we've been seeking, is to just control a whole neighborhood and to create these
Hmm.
different environments all in one place.
Yeah, I think that really does come through when you visit Sage Oak and Bella Groves were two 16-bed homes, and that's how it was designed by the builders. If we had more say so in it and we had the land, we probably would have gone five, six different homes like you do. I think you're right. It's a blend of small and intimate, but still having a little bit of scale so that I got to say, having 2 16 beds is difficult in a lot of ways that I think having five or six homes would make it a lot easier. Um, and, certainly from a business and financial standpoint, we almost have to grow to a second location, third location, because we've kind of proven the concept that what we do works, but now we need to capture a little bit more benefit of scale.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that, as you know, because you've been in the business for a long time as an
Mhm.
employee and working for some of these really large organizations, is so
Yeah.
few organizations do all of the following: one, build and develop; right?
Hmm.
Two, own the real estate and the operations or management company. And so, and then we also raise the capital to fund those things. And
Yeah.
so that means that we
Mm.
essentially occupy all the seats at the table in which there could be stakeholder clashes. And so I think one of the things that really kind of sets us apart is that it's very common during a development process to have investors, to have the developer, the builder, and the operator all kind of clashing about whenever you're doing value
Mm.
engineering on a project, right? When you're doing the VE process, and what are we going to cut? What are we going to take out? And
Yeah.
so, because we're an operator that designs and develops, we get this operational outcome that is very rare in our industry.
Hmm.
And so that's one of the secrets to our successes, is that we don't have to clash with other stakeholders that have different motivations, right? And so we want to
Yeah.
produce a product that is operationally sound, and that's very different than, say, if you buy a building from a real estate investment trust and you only are the operations company and you can get fired. It just creates a
Yeah.
lot of tension in the process, and I think that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons why the way we fund and the way we pay for building assisted living and memory care in this country is kind of fundamentally broken. And so one of our
Hmm.
unique attributes is that we were the designer, the developer, and controlled that process all the way through being the operator.
Yeah, man. Let's drill down even further into that, because I think you're 100% right. I've felt I couldn't quite describe it before. I think in the first I don't know 6 to 8 years of working in this industry, you're a, a young buck trying to make a name in the industry and feel like be the good company man and just do your job and keep your head down. And I didn't really learn until further along in leadership roles how the funding and the building and everything you just mentioned about stakeholders with different agendas and different needs, how much that actually impacts you down the line on the front line. And I have been part of many situations where if you're like managed, you're operating. I was an ED of a community. We had our company that was managing that community, and then you had different people, investors that were going to basically dispose of that property. They knew it all along, and when I took the job, I didn't know any of that stuff. It was just like, I'm going to work for that company to be an executive director. And then, a few months in, they let us know, hey, here's the whole situation, and that the building is going to be sold off, and the operating part of it is going to be sold off. The management contract is going to be coming to an end. And I'm just learning about all of this, and it was incredibly difficult to lead a team, to inspire a team with the knowledge that you're not going to get any more capex, you're not getting any more investment from the company who's trying to sell that property. And it was just, I don't know, it kind of felt like you're in no man's land, without a lot of rope.
Yeah, for sure. And to a person, in the last several years, maybe it really wasn't so much whenever we had the 6, 8 bed homes in Dallas. But once we
Hmm.
started building communities that, 80 beds, 96 beds, but again, separate
Yeah,
houses, once we started building those communities and people started to intellectually understand, we started getting a lot of executive directors that would apply for jobs and say one of the number one things they like about Sage Oak is that there isn't a third
mm,
party management company. We both own the real estate and the operations. And so they figure out very quickly that their job is to, work inside the vision that myself and the regional team cast. And there's just it's the agenda is clear,
yeah,
and there's a lot of different people with different agendas in most other organizations, and it's true in like hotels, right? You walk in and it's like
hmm,
Marriott, but Marriott's the branded company, and there's an
sure,
operator, and then someone else owns the building.
yeah,
It's true in those things, but being in a hotel, it's a 1 day experience. You don't live there for 2 or 3 years,
totally,
and the level of intimacy is completely different. And so I think, one of our really unique selling propositions, and one that, in conversations with you, I know you'll be excited in the future that when you get a
hmm,
chance to, design and be a part of the early stages versus buying something that already exists and kind of being the operator. And,
yeah,
I think fortunately, it sounds like you have a lot of control over your Bella Grove's world, and a
yeah,
lot of input. But that's very rarely true for operators. Operators are
hmm,
often neglected and often just, they're like, hey, hit your metrics. And if you don't hit
hmm,
your metrics, you're going to get fired. And,
yeah,
just think about how that might have played out, say, during the pandemic, right? There
yeah,
was so much pressure, and they're like, hey, you're paying too much for staff. And you're like, you're lucky we can find staff in this environment. And so, I think we really started to see a lot of cracks in that model through the pandemic. And so it's
yeah,
it's no surprise that now executive directors are saying, I'm coming to work for you because I'm working for you, not for some
yeah,
layered multi corporation experience.
yeah,
And so that's been something that I've taken note of over the years, and
mm,
we just did it because we thought that was the right way to do it. But it come to find out that we were just kind of flowing in the opposite direction of the industry the
yeah.
whole time.
Yeah, it's a huge competitive advantage. I thought going into this of all of my kind of internal um, apprehension about starting Bella Groves with my partners was, man, how are we going to compete against all the big guys here in this market? And I've learned over the last 2.5 years, it's actually a huge advantage. We can move very quickly. We can do things with marketing and staffing and operations and stuff that I mean, there's no way I would have gotten this stuff approved anywhere else. And because we are our own stakeholders, we own the building, we own the property, we have complete control over Bella Groves, the operating company. And we didn't raise capital. We went through traditional funding of bank loans and stuff for the property itself. And we've been, for the most part, bootstrapping operating costs to get started. Now, I don't know that we could have done that for a 6 to 8, bed location.
Right.
But yeah, we got started. So here's my main question coming from this is, do you think other people can do what we did? Can people who are like maybe in the regional VP level of these larger companies who are feeling very frustrated about the status quo, the main question I would imagine if they're listening right now is, that sounds good for you, Lo and James, but that doesn't feel very feasible to me. Do you think it's feasible that this could be something other people can do?
Well, I think with respect, it may be the wrong question, which is to
Okay.
say, I think that the better question would be: do those people, if we're talking about regional managers or
Yeah.
executive directors or directors of nursing and people that have been in this industry and they sense all these things, nothing stops them from taking their talents to places like Bella Groves and taking to places like Sage Oak. And
Hmm.
the reality is that I think that we've gone through a period of time, and it's really kind of reached an apex lately, where entrepreneurship and starting companies and being your own boss, it's kind of become an American obsession, and it
Mm-hmm.
frankly is. There's a lot of broken dreams along this highway. There's
Yeah.
a lot of people that have lost a lot of money. There's a lot of families that have been ruined over overly aggressive entrepreneurial endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to discourage anybody from starting something on their own. But at the same token, there's going to be in an organization. One day I may have 1,000 employees and may have 2 or 3 partners, and so
Mm-hmm.
sort of the ratio of people that are going to be entrepreneurial and the ratio of people that are going to add value into the system and be direct care staff. Right? Not everyone can be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
Not everyone can be a worker. You have to have a mix of those things. And so I think what I would say is that a lot of times I see, and your journey is very interesting because there's a lot of people that have come from your side. It's like I came from outside the industry, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I just didn't have any of the baggage or any of the perspective, and so I just sort of came to conclusions just organically from
Yeah.
outside the industry. And I think you're coming from the industry and you're starting to say, hey, why do we have to do it this way? And so
Yeah.
even though we ended up in somewhat similar places,
Mm-hmm.
we came from very different perspectives. And a lot of when I used to coach students, a lot of the people that I think that struggled the most were employees that try to go entrepreneurial,
Mm.
because when you first start a business, there's not any other departments. There's
Yeah.
not IT, there's not sales and
Right.
marketing, there's not
Yeah.
compliance, there's not legal, there's not, so like the printer breaks and your organization can't function and you're like, how do I fix the printer? And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, hey, like the first time you have an employee quit and you can't get into their cell phone that you bought,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, this is, so there's like so many entrepreneurial things they don't teach you. And
Yeah.
then one day you're like, I'm offering my employees insurance.
Yeah.
I now have to be an expert on health insurance
Yeah.
and 401k. And so it is, I think there's just such layers of complexity, and especially
Yeah.
in our business because it's so operationally intensive that we have healthcare, we have hospitality, there's the real estate component to it. There's just all these things that kind of come together. It is very rare. So I think the people that want to do this entrepreneurially need to partner with people, right? So you
Mm.
really, it's never, almost never going to be a
Right.
solo entrepreneur
Yeah.
endeavor. At a small scale, it can be, but if you plan to get large and or
Yeah.
get medium sized, and a medium sized company is in the danger zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not too big to fail, right? And then you have all these problems and challenges, and so I think what I would say is that it's absolutely attainable, but you have to bring a certain set of skills. And so I think
Yeah.
those regional managers that are thinking about starting something, they need to be thinking about how, instead of chasing the job that gives them the most money or the job that gives them the best work life balance. If they want to be entrepreneurs, they need to saddle up next to and get as close as they can to entrepreneurial leadership in their organization, and they need to start spending time around people that have gone through the process and done
Yeah.
those things. And so that's like where, hey, I'm going to go intern with someone that's going to show me the ropes and I'm going to add value to those organizations. And so I think that's a big facet to it. And I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times employees don't stop and ask themselves, hey, which job would I take for my 5-year goals? Which job would I take
Mm-hmm.
for my
Mm-hmm.
10-year goals? They take the job that's like, I can go watch the football game on Friday, or I get paid more money. And those are all really, really important things, but those are not
Yeah.
questions that you're afforded as an entrepreneur when you're running a 24-hour operating business.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, this could branch off into 100 different topics. Um, what I was thinking is that you're right. It's a very, very narrow, like the bullseye is tiny. When you think about um and for me, I think I'm not a solopreneur here at Bella Grows. I've got partners, I've got people that help with parts of the business. But you're right. I think a lot of people might have a challenge if you've been brought up, 10, 15, 20 years with an employee mindset, whether you're a regional, a VP, or in the C-suite. If you kind of grow up in business with an employee mindset, it is really hard to convert to an owner mindset. And I think, yeah, you're right. I took an approach where I I was a caregiver. I did all of the stuff at the community level. I climbed the ranks through corporate structure. And I realized for me, I needed something that helped educate me into an ownership mindset. And for me, it happened to be an MBA. Not that that has to be something everyone else does, but for me, I needed something that was outside of the lane of employee mentality of how do I think about starting and building and eventually scaling a business as an owner. And then
Hmm.
at Bella Grows, what we're doing right now is I am right now the operator, the vision kind of keeping person of what Bella Grows is. But outside of it, I always have to think about I'm building a business that has to exist outside of my own personal passions,
Yeah.
right?
And it's got
And
to get to a certain size for that to ever happen, because
yeah,
you just have to be big enough to be able to fire yourself, and then you can focus on what you want to do. And,
yeah.
I think it'd be important. What university helps you transition from an employee mindset to an owner mindset?
Yeah, it was the University of Texas at
Oh,
Austin,
you don't
McCombs.
say.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Um, the Longhorns. Do you know them?
I think they're doing pretty well in college football right now. That's what
Yeah,
I'm
that's it.
hearing.
Yeah. The
Okay.
burnt orange and white team. So UT, man, and that's a school that I've always wanted to be at. I grew up in Texas. Did you grow up in Texas?
I grew up on the border, so I lived
Border.
20
Okay.
minutes. So Louisiana, where I was from, I lived 20 minutes from the border to Texas, and
Yeah.
Texas is where I went and kind of did all my fun things.
Yeah. So it has a little bit to do with my origin story in senior living in general. That I I lived in Austin, and I at the time back in 2008, I had hoped to get into law school at UT, and so I was studying for the LSAT, doing all that, and I got a job at a retirement community because it was across the street, and that changed the trajectory of my life. And when did I get started there? 2018. So 10 years later, I did go to UT, but as part of their executive MBA program.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not to throw you off, and obviously you want to do our shameful plug for our common university, but
That's right.
yeah, no, I mean, I think, yeah, so I do think it's really important to have the right mindset, and it is when you first start a company, you are everything, right? You and
Yeah.
your partners are everything, and just when I was coaching people, for example, I had this couple that they bought. It was two couples that bought a care home, and I've actually bought a care home that was struggling
Hmm.
from two husband and wives, and they each had 25% of the business,
Mm.
and one person's job was construction. So when they built it, their job was done. And now you essentially had 25% of equity allocated to this operating business to a person who has no more functionality in the business aside from, I guess calling somebody to unclog the toilets or,
Yeah.
doing maintenance. And there was an operator who was getting all the calls at 3 a.m. and was like acting. And
Hmm.
so just the structure of how they decided to put the company together was ill suited, ill fated.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of people that dive into this business. From the real estate world, there's quite a few educational seminars that kind of
Yeah.
pitch this as a great real estate investment. So you have all these real estate investors that that are like they're house flippers, or they've got a bunch of rental property, and they're like
Yeah.
trying to decide between I'm going to get into assisted living or dementia care or Airbnb, right? And they both have an operational hospitality component to it, but the level of operational intensity is so different. And then you have
Yeah.
kind of people coming from the healthcare side, or coming from the business side, even though I would consider you coming from the healthcare side since you worked in the business.
Yeah.
And so then you have like nurses or executive directors or regionals, and they come in and they don't really understand any of the real estate or the
Right.
financial structuring or how the business works. And so you really kind of need to
Mm.
pair two groups together. You almost need a real estate person that can do construction and manage projects, and then you need kind of an operational person that kind of understands those things. And so you really need quite a few people, quite a few smart, hardworking people that are dedicated to the same mission. And anytime you have to have that, then you run the risk of personality clashes. Do
Hmm.
we have a different vision for where we want to take the company in 2, 3, 4 years? So it's definitely daunting. I
Yeah.
do think that, and it should be, because there should be barriers for entry for what we do, and
Yeah.
it shouldn't be as easy as buying a rental house.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to talk
Mm.
about with that, but I think the answer that I would say is that Do things with intention. If you're an employee and you want to become entrepreneurial in this space, then do things with intention with your
Yeah.
career, right?
Yeah.
So instead of taking, if you get paid $20,000 less, but you can work for James Lee, well,
Hmm.
that would probably be a good career move,
Yeah.
because now you get to ask and you get to spend quality time to figure out, like, hey, why did you make this decision, and where did you do this, and what would you do differently? And now you get all that quality time, and you're in the back of your
Hmm.
mind, you're adding value to an organization like Bella Gross, but you're really getting ready to launch your own version.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably my best advice for those types of people, and to respect the business. I mean,
Hmm.
I manage $40 million in real estate, and so there's a lot that comes to that. And you just think about, you can be the greatest operator in the world, but if you don't understand how the U.S. Treasury or the bond market
Hmm.
works, you don't understand how interest rates work, you don't understand the bank piece, then you can run into trouble, right? And so
Yeah.
there's just a lot that goes beyond just incontinence care and cooking good
Right.
meals and having a good engagement program when you're at the full, at the top of
Yeah.
the business and responsible for every aspect of this business.
Totally. Yeah. There's so many implications downstream for everything that you just mentioned, and more. And it really is a complex business if you think about it. That um, you've got capital, you've got real estate, you've got operations, you've got like actual care, and then in what we do with dementia care, um, that's it's science and philosophy. It's there's so many things baked into what we do. Pulling back up to where my question was coming from, is to think about, I don't know if you think about it a lot. I think about it a lot. I suspect you might as well. Of we've got our own business to run, but for me, I do think about, maybe it's because I came up through senior living and I've seen so many other organizations. I really do hope that the work that we do influences other organizations and our industry at large, not for credit or popularity or LinkedIn, fame. It really is for a genuine hope that the stuff that we get to do, more of our industry should be doing that. It should be representing, the outcomes that we see, both for residents and families, but also for our team. And that's something I really do want to talk to you about too. Is that I can tell you, as an employee that was being paid hourly, and as a executive, level employee for other organizations, um, these businesses are not meant to. They're not designed to have the employee as the recipient of the goodwill of that business. You're paid to do a job. You're functional, for a lot of organizations. And um, I've seen, just from being there and seeing the content that you put out on LinkedIn, more than half of your stuff is just like giving somebody a pat on the back about the value they add to an organization. um, but yeah, unfortunately, too much of our industry doesn't treat our employees that way. They're just kind of interchangeable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I have a lot of thoughts about this that are, I think we're at this place demographically, and this is where I think, I think you have a sense of hope, and I maybe
Hmm.
have more of a sense of doom and dread industry
Hmm.
wide, which is that there was a book, it was written in like 2017 or 2018. It was called "Who Will Care for Us?"
Yeah.
And it was basically a demographic study of
Hmm.
kind of basically all the reasons why, the demographic case for, hey, and we talk about this a lot privately, that unfortunately a lot of people are going to get dementia, right? We wish it weren't the case, but a lot of people are going to get dementia demographically,
Yeah.
and that's going to create a lot of pressure on the healthcare system. We obviously know about the aging populations, post World War II baby boom, and so we have all these demographic reasons why the business supply side of, or the demand side, is going to be huge, but nobody really has done all that much work on the supply of labor
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
And so I think we have this really difficult challenge. And so I think where I'm hopeful is, I'm not hopeful for the industry at large, because I
Hmm.
can't do the math. But
Hmm.
what I am hopeful for is, I think people can create islands, and I think people can create special opportunities to where employees are treated well, and are given an opportunity to grow, learn,
Yeah.
educate. I've had quite a few people that have been with me for 6 or 7 years on this 9-year journey, and stable staffs are I think easier when you are fully leased. So if you buy a building that's at 95% occupancy, the team's in a rhythm and a routine. They know what it is. When
Yeah.
you go like you've done, when you go from zero
Hmm.
residents to 16, and then from
Yeah.
16 to 32, your team
Yeah.
is always in flux. And
Right.
the people that are working, and you need to have new skills, and you have to double your bandwidth in those examples. And so I've kind of gone from 48 beds to 220 beds, and so you have to 5x your bandwidth. And so ultimately, I cannot, our company motto is great care, great food, great communication.
Hmm.
Um, I can't, I'm not in a position to be better than anybody else at delivering great care. I
Hmm.
can't cook. I love food, but I can't cook.
Hmm.
So the only thing I can do of the three is great communication. And great communication to me is the heart of leadership. And if you lead, but you don't communicate well, no one's going to follow you. And so I put such an emphasis on um, the management team, because at a certain point, I think a lot of people, and you're in your buildings often. I'm in my buildings
Hmm.
often, but I also have a building that by car 5.5 hours apart.
Yeah.
So I can't have an interpersonal relationship with 250 caregivers.
Right.
It's just not realistic for me to do. So some people I know, some people I don't know. Often the names I know are the ones that are doing an amazing job or the ones that are getting in trouble, right? That's
Yeah.
usually the names that kind of come
Yeah.
up in our meetings. And so I've just said, look, I'm going to focus in on having an amazing relationship with 40 managers. And those
Hmm.
40 managers can then model how I spend time with them and how I talk to them and how I think about them. And then we just have conversations about those things. And so I don't think as an organization, Sage Oak is like world class at how we um, as far as like our philosophies about how we take care of caregivers. But what we try to
Hmm.
do is we want to be world class in how we engage with our management staff,
Hmm.
and then have a bleed over effect into how they deal with the caregivers. And so, we bring concepts like trauma informed leadership, and we try to
Hmm.
explain to them like, hey, like, put yourself in their shoes. Imagine if you had a flat tire and you couldn't afford it, or put
Yeah.
yourself in their shoes and imagine if, you know, you're now housing insecure because you broke up with your boyfriend.
Yeah.
So, you really have to kind of do that. And so having been somebody that, a lot of people in our roles, I know you were a caregiver, I wasn't, but a lot of people that, are heads of organizations, never been in a caregiver interview,
Mhm.
right? So it's
Yeah.
all theoretical to them. And so having spent a lot of time talking with caregivers and understanding their problems, and to this day, I still am the person that clicks send whenever we loan a caregiver money. So I get to kind of
Mhm.
hear the stories and situations that lead up to those things.
Yeah.
It makes you have an appreciation for the fact that they're doing very difficult work,
Yeah.
and we ask so much of the care team that you can't, if you don't respect them and you don't see the value they bring to their organization, if you see them as cogs in the machine, please go do something else.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. It's of course I'm right there with you, and it's a drum I've beat for a very long time, and I don't see lots of signs of improvement in our industry in that regard. Um, and I'll back up a little bit to an earlier point in our conversation. I feel a kind of an obligatory optimism with senior living, and it's almost like for me I have to take that position, otherwise it can feel very doom and gloom,
Sure.
um and there's a reality of, I think, where our look, I think that for the most part the model of senior living that has been built out, I mean, i- my guess is that the owners and the people who have the highest amount of stake in the current way the business has been developed and run, they're biding time until they're done, right? And they're cashing out on their investment, metaphorically, but financially. And I've used this analogy before, that if senior living were a neighborhood that we all lived in, and we all own the houses on this street. There are some people who own lots of houses, and they're getting ready to sell those houses and duck out and go somewhere else. And then there are other people who have moved into that neighborhood. They've bought a house. They want to beautify the neighborhood. They want to paint the houses. They want to build a little park. They want to make that street better. But the people who own most of the houses there, they're not going to do much in terms of investing into the next 30, 40 years of that neighborhood. They're
Sure.
getting ready to leave, right? And so they might put on a coat of paint to freshen up the house, but it is really just to secure their investment until they exit. And it's how I've seen most of this industry, that people are just holding on, and they'll let somebody else deal with workforce shortage. They'll let other people deal with all of the stuff that we are in it for the long haul.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I have
mm,
an incredible sense of optimism,
mhm.
but I don't. It's not systemic or system wide
Yeah,
optimism. It is just
yeah,
optimism in that I think where and I actually believe that that there'll have to be a fundamental transformation for some of the things that
yeah.
we would like to see happen, and it would be something along the lines of just the entire way we do this, and so kind of to cap on your neighborhood model. Imagine if you, the consumer, were going through this
Hmm.
neighborhood and you
Yeah,
saw a house that was reasonably nice, and you thought somebody owned it, but they were actually a tenant,
yeah.
and so
Hmm.
but they're not going to make any capital improvements. They're not
Right.
and they're calling the landlord, hey, can you fix the pipes? And like, nah, I'm not really going to do it. And so, there's obviously a kind of a long established distinguishment between, people that own a house
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
someone that rents a house, right? But then think about the people that built the house and the
Hmm.
people that designed the house, and how invested they are. So I do think that we have to, the model needs to be flipped on its head in terms of how we
Hmm.
do things and how we think about things. And so
Yeah.
I think there's going to be incredible opportunity. And I think the best days, I think the best operators and the best organizations, a lot of them have just recently been created or will be
Hmm.
created in the near future. So I'm optimistic about the top. I'm
Yeah.
optimistic about what the best. If you look at the best 1% of operators in 2030, or you look at the best operators of say 2010, I think the
Hmm.
best operators of 2030 will be light years ahead
Yeah.
of the operators
Agreed.
of say 2010. What I'm
Mm.
worried about is the average, and what I'm worried about is
Yeah.
the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I hope, yeah, and I think you're right. There's going to be a greater disparity between the bottom and the top. In 2010, Delta's probably not very far, and I think it is widening now. Um, and I think, honestly, I think platforms like LinkedIn and being able to stay connected with other people and know what else is happening in the industry beyond, before LinkedIn, I had no idea what was going on outside of what my leaders of my company told me was going on in the industry. And, for me, that was a big part of the education of the macro of what's going on. And I do believe it's important to understand the macro, even if you're, a 32 bed standalone facility in Bulverde, Texas. I think you need to know what the macro is so that you can position your competitive advantage, not just to your employees, but to your customers. But yeah, I hope that you and I both, Low, and other people like us, that we rise to that 1% and are influencing change from that vantage.
Yeah, no, I definitely take a lot of pride, when we go into a new market or do something new, and we, the first property I ever took over, they only had 3 residents out of 8,
Hmm.
and the other owner had run it into the ground. And after a week, I went and surveyed the residents. I'd never done this before, and I'm like, hey,
Hmm.
like, how are we doing? They're like, you're so much better. And I'm like, really? Like I'm a week in,
Yeah,
but I mean, the bar was pretty low. I mean, we
yeah,
changed 80 light bulbs in a 3,500 square foot house because I mean, it was like the fridge was empty, it was dark, it was,
yeah,
so it was just a very depressing place. And so like it wasn't hard to jump over that bar. But I think once you kind of, I do think, to your prior question about entrepreneurship, I think some people just need to do it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
they just need to take over something. They need to start small, and they need to take a risk they can intellectually wrap their mind around. So I mean, I started with a single 8 bed
Hmm.
house, right?
Yeah.
had 3 customers, right?
Hmm.
So I was the manager. I went to every shift change to teach how to communicate between the 2 teams because I saw shift change as like the most important thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, let me give you a report on what happened. Let me set the table, what's going on. Let me give you the, what's the mood? How are the residents doing?
Yeah.
And I did every tour for 6 months. And, I was
Hmm.
like, I'm selling these 10 by 10 rooms that are Texas state minimum rooms. I'm like, this is so hard. And
Yeah.
it was so important for me to do that because then I was like, hey, like people don't want this. So
Right.
people want private bathrooms. Okay, we'll give them that. And okay, people want this.
Yeah.
And I really need a meeting space. I can't be having tours of the dining table. And so I learned so much about operations by just jumping in it, And
Yeah.
so you could definitely do this business as a trial by fire. I think the problem that I see more often than not is so many people that come from this entrepreneurially, they want to buy a turnkey,
Yeah.
well-oiled operating machine. And that's the wrong way to do it because then
Yeah.
you're essentially taking over something that's actually good, at
Hmm.
least from the perspective of the customer. If I'm taking over something that, my average takeover was at one, it was 33% occupancy.
Hmm.
So they weren't doing a good job. And so I got a chance to come in and learn. And while I'm learning, I'm better than the person that I replaced
Yeah.
entrepreneurially.
Yeah.
And so many people just don't want to do the hard work. And that is where I think it's brought. Where you have your franchising systems and you have all these things, and you have all these people like, I want to come in and buy this business that's so personal in nature. I'm going to overpay for it, and then I'm going to get debt on it, and my debt payments are
Hmm.
going to be incredibly high. When the secret to entrepreneurship, when you don't know how to do it, is buy something really really inexpensive that's not
Yeah.
being run very well, and then learn how to do it. And then your next project, you take those lessons to the next one and the next one and the next one.
Yeah.
And so I'm running on like the third iteration
Hmm.
of this 9-year journey at this
Yeah.
point. And I already have things I want to change about our design and have things I want to change about how we think about things operationally because I went in and did something really hard initially that I didn't know that I could do. And I
Yeah.
took a chance, and maybe I would have led to really negative outcomes for those 3 people. But I figured worst case scenario, if I got to change 80 light bulbs in the first couple of days and I got to put food in the refrigerator, I can't do any worse. And so there was a uniqueness that we brought to the table. And that really afforded us a chance to have confidence that we could do this because this was a person that had been in the business for 6 or 7 years. Their quality had fallen off, and it was a divorce situation. And I think the husband and wife together could run the business, but individually they could not. And so being able to take that risk propelled me to so many different things. And so maybe the answer to your question about, employees jumping in is don't try to buy something turnkey. Try to buy something where you can make mistakes and figure out what type of entrepreneur you are and learn like, hey, I'm not very good at tours. I need to get better.
Hmm.
Or, hey, this room needs to be staged. Or, hey, I like these design elements. Or, just that to me was a really important part of my career that people that know me now or maybe know me post these neighborhood builds or these $15 million $20 million facilities. I started with a $650,000 8-bed home in Dallas with 3 residents.
I think it's good advice, man. It's and we're on our first iteration, with Bella Grows, and I'm 2.5 years, the three plus years into partnership, business formation, launching our very, very first effort. And you're right. You want to build a lemonade stand first. You don't want to go build a grocery store. You got to, just see if you can sell lemonade.
Yep.
And yeah, and that what you described about people who want to come in and find that turnkey operation. It is like I know people you're talking about, like they're real estate investors, they do other things, and it's like, should I buy a storage facility or should I buy senior living? And we do have a lot of people come into the field that way, and some people who have access to a lot of capital, they're like, let's buy 7 senior living facilities that are cheap to buy on the dollar, and then there's a lot of assumptions about how you come in and infuse capital, like it's this magic check that turns a senior living operator into a good one. So, it happens at a small scale, but it also happens at a huge scale with, REITs and private equity coming in and buying huge portfolios, not just a small little 8 bed, 16 bed like you and I did, but let's go buy 40,000 doorknobs and, add that to our portfolio. And unfortunately, that has a lot of consequences to people at the community level.
It does.
Yeah.
It absolutely does, and I mean, I think the interesting thing is this. The thing is, we always think about senior housing as this like
Hmm.
special, unique thing, and in a way, it is. But if you're buying an HVAC company, or you're buying a plumbing company, or you're buying anything that's a service business in which you have to serve clients, and
Hmm.
look, if your air conditioner breaks in the middle of the summer at 1 in the morning, it's a 24-hour business, right? And
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
your plumbing's backed up, it's a 24-hour business in some ways. There's a lot of language around small business acquisition that I think we get kind of lost in. And the
Mm.
truth is, if you're really interested in buying an assisted living or memory care facility, you really should be speaking small business acquisition language and not
Yeah.
real estate acquisition language. Because there's this huge problem where people come in, they buy something, and then the general manager quits, right? And they're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, now I have to run something that I don't know how to run. Or
Totally.
they call you and they say, James, we want to buy Bella Groves, and let's something happens, and you say, sure, we'll buy Bella Groves, and you sign a 2-year deal to stay on as CEO with a non-compete.
Mhm.
And you know what happens? The place goes downhill, and then you go
Mhm.
start a Bella Groves again, and then
Yeah.
they're left to pick up the pieces. And
Yeah.
it is it's a very the difference between this and say an HVAC company or a plumbing company, setting the staff aside, is our
Sure.
customers that are under our care. And in the case of dementia, it's a custodial
Mhm.
relationship in some ways, right? If someone with dementia says, I'd like to not take a shower today, you have to kind of look and be like, okay, you haven't had one in 2 weeks. I kind of have to figure out a way to give you one. Whereas in assisted living,
Mhm.
and someone says, I don't want to take a shower today, you're like, well, that's your choice. It's up to
Yeah.
you. You're an adult. So, I feel like,
Mm.
because the customer can be so impacted by those decisions that happen at this top level, the stakes are higher, and you just can't get it wrong.
Absolutely.
And that's just kind of the approach that we did. Is I'd rather buy an empty building with a license and
Yeah.
fill it up with people that know our cadence, know our language, than inherit someone else's customers and have to try to mimic their cadence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I I I I hope, and we'll kind of put a bow on this and talk about some other things, but I do hope that when I think about senior living 10 years, 15 years down the road, I sure hope that there are a lot more small business owners like us, that we do swing a little bit back the other way, where from 2008 till 2020, which is, that was 12 years of when I started in senior living to when I exited kind of traditional corporate ladder of senior living. Actually, it's 2021, so 13 years. That's like K through 12. It's like my first phase of education was learning from um, that portion of senior living, and we'll see what the next 13 years looks like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
definitely be different. We know that.
Yeah, it will be different. Tell me something you really love about Sage Oak that you maybe didn't know was going to happen. I'd love to, because I've got a lot of surprises, even in the 2.5 years at Bella Groves. Tell me something that kind of happens there that you're like, man, I didn't know this was going to happen, but I really love this.
I maybe just have one thing, which is that I've kind of having had maybe half the company before the pandemic and sort of half in the smack dab of the pandemic, which was a hard time,
Hmm.
and for a lot of people, and especially hard for our industry. I never knew. I always thought I was going to take the easy path. I always thought that I was going to just figure out a way to make easy money and just do
Hmm.
something and just be smart and make easy money. And when I started this business, I fell in love with doing something hard. I fell
Hmm.
in love with doing something that a lot of my peers can't do.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with doing things like leading large teams, which
Hmm.
is inherent in what we do for a living because it's so labor intensive. And so
Yeah.
the thing I really love about what I do is I was thinking about this the other day, like if I wasn't this, what would I be?
Yeah.
And I was thinking I'd probably be a football coach.
Yeah.
because like it's the same. It's just you're
Mm,
trying to. It's a very high stakes. And football games are very high stake. It's a
sure.
very high stakes business. There's a lot of preparation and things that kind of go on. It's hard work, and you have to lead people to get to an outcome. And
Yeah.
so, what I love is I love the people part of the business. I love the opportunity to do things that I just don't think other people would do. And I don't really want to do hurricane evacuation in Lake Charles. I
Hmm.
really don't. But we do it because we know that we're going to do a better job of it than some corporation.
Yeah.
And so I love that part of it. I love the logistical challenge of figuring out how to do something that has to be done, right? And so, it's probably the same thing that I think maybe a firefighter feels, or a
Hmm.
police officer or a fighter pilot. It's just I'm doing something that takes its toll on me, but I believe in the mission and I believe in the nobility of what I'm doing. So that's probably my biggest kind of thing that
Yeah.
surprised me is I thought I would just, make money the easy way. And now I take pleasure in not making money, but I take pleasure in just doing something that's hard
Yeah.
and that things that will scare other people and run them off. And I'm just running into the building that's on fire.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that I think a lot of people in our profession can identify with, Lo, that um there's this element of surprise about this thing that we didn't realize that we were going to love, and for some of us that we were going to spend our entire careers doing. And when I went to college for the first time for undergrad, there's no way I would have told like my professors and my friends, like, yeah, I hope I end up in senior living one day, and spend a whole life and career there. But man, so many beautiful things are happening in my life as a result. And the really really cool part of the seats that you and I get to hold, and because we come from this perspective, is the lives that we're changing. It's our team, really. Like, that's the biggest long-term impact that we have. With our residents and with our families, we get to know them for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and we make a difference during that time. Yes. But beyond that, there are already residents and families that moved in with us within the last 2.5 years that, once they've kind of lived their part of life with us, and they move on, we don't hear from the family as much. And eventually that fades, as these relationships naturally do. But there's some people that I'm working with now that, God, I hope I know them when I'm 70 and um, you know 30 plus years into this part of my life. And I think that's really cool. And beyond our own employees, getting to know, you and I don't know how we would have ever known each other. You live in North Texas and I live in the Hill Country. But every once in a while, I get to have this little enjoyment of my life of conversations with you.
Um, yeah, I know. It's I think the thing, you talk about changing your team.
Yeah.
I try to imagine, 42-year-old Low. I think that's how old I am. Yep, 42-year-old Low,
Sure.
uh, meeting 25-year-old Low, and I don't think I would recognize myself.
Mm,
Maybe I would, intellectually know that was me, but it wouldn't be the same person. And I think that the people that knew me back then would be like, "Yeah, you're not the same person." And I think that that's the fundamental change started with me, and
hmm.
when I started to see, when my comparison points where I was just taking over these struggling operations, and I was just seeing
Yeah.
how other people who were quote unquote professionals at this and been in the industry for a long time
Mm,
and weren't doing a very good job. And so I just started to create this complex where it's like, hey, like I have a duty to buy some of these things and have a duty to run some of these things because the people that are doing it
hmm.
aren't doing it. Maybe they're doing it to the best of their ability, but they haven't studied or practiced or trained hard enough.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's really been transformational for me. And I've had a lot of life change happen, the whole time I've had the company. And
Hmm.
it's interesting to just think it's been the one constant, the one
Yeah.
constant in the last 9 years has been Sage Oak and my dog.
Yeah.
Those have been the two constants in my life.
Yeah, this happened in our first conversation, and I feel like, and by the way, I'm really proud of the fact that Our friendship, delves into areas of personal life, um, and and for me, there are so many parallels in our stories, and that surprises me too. That you and I also have a lot more in common, and I think when we have the backdrop of senior care, we live our life through this lens of this bigger cosmic thing that we get to do, which is take care of our own elders in our own communities. um, yeah, I've you know through senior living, I've lost my dad at an early age through this process. I became a dad, twice. We've gone through a lot of great stuff, a lot of hardship, and I'm sure there's a lot more of that to come. But I just, not certainly in no way to disparage other professions or anything, but there's so much philosophy and life, wisdom that comes from the day to day of our work, that, I mean, how can you not feel romantic about the work that we do when it also gives you the context to be able to kind of negotiate all of these difficult things that happen. And like, if I were a software engineer for whatever technology company, and I had to go through the grief of losing my dad at such an early age, I don't know that I would have turned to anything remotely close to my profession to make sense of all of that. But for me, it was a natural parlay, of like, I'm going through this thing, but my God, I mean, I help coach other people through this in their lives so often. Maybe what it did was it gave me the language and the emotional awareness to be able to, like, successfully, I hope, successfully navigate this. And I think it would have been incredibly harder for me if I were doing anything else, any other job besides this.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, I agree 100% that these things that happen to us. It doesn't. You're not necessarily a better lawyer if your dad
Hmm.
passes away while you're practicing
Hmm.
law. Maybe you are, but I guess maybe if you're doing
Hmm.
family law or estate planning or something.
Yeah.
But you're, like you said, you're not necessarily, you don't necessarily become a better software engineer if your dad passes away. I couldn't have done this if my
Yeah.
dad hadn't passed away, because I started my company about a year after my dad passed away.
Hmm.
And I think it just kind of set me in a place of like, hey, like, what do I want to do, and like, how do I want to live my life, and have
Yeah.
what am I what am I going to leave in this world that has any meaning
Hmm.
if it doesn't involve helping other people. And so,
Yeah.
and then you just go through these things, and and sometimes, I mean, and not to turn to the negative, but, and stop me if you've ever heard this in your career, when they go, when a customer has a concern or a complaint,
Yeah.
and they're not, we deal with so many people, and a lot of those people are not personally equipped to be leaders, right? It's
Yeah.
just a thing. And so
Sure.
you'll get that message that's like, imagine if this was your dad, imagine if this was your mom. And that's the way they're trying to tap into your emotion. And I'm like, thinking to myself, I started the company because my dad died, and
Hmm.
it's like, so it's just, it's so interesting to see people go through this process, and there's this grief, and there's denial, and there's guilt around all of these things. And they don't have to manipulate you. They don't have to say, can you
Right.
imagine?
Exactly.
They can just say, here's the things I'd like fixed. Here's the
Yeah.
concerns that I have. And we can say, okay, we can fix these, but we can't fix these, or whatever that is. But it's so interesting to see people, when they get in these moments, and they're doing the best that they know how. And it's not a criticism of our clients, not a criticism of those things. But the reality is that such a small percentage of people are adept at, being the power of attorney or being the guardian of another
Yeah.
person. And then they get thrust in this role, and then they interface with this system, and all systems have limitations, and all systems have flaws, and
Hmm.
every operating principle Bella Grove has, there's a corollary to that, and every operating principle that Sage Oak has, there's a corollary to that. And so you can't be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And so just to have the opportunity to just be like, hey, like, I've been where they've been, and I understand where they're coming from. I don't think I could lead this organization at a young age if I hadn't experienced, because I mean, most of my, all of our
Yeah.
residents are older than me, with the exception
Hmm.
of one time I had someone that was younger than me. And pretty much all the family, and every now and then there's a grandkid mixed in that's a
Yeah.
peer.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the family are my peers as well, are
Hmm.
my elders as well.
Yeah.
And so I've just compacted a lot of life in a short period of time, and a lot of life events, and they weren't my choice, but I
Yeah.
just sort of turned those into the weapon. I turned those into that emotional understanding that I could either be adrift or I
Hmm.
could use that as the wind, and I chose
Yeah.
to make that the wind that allows the company to sail.
Yeah. Yeah. And um, maybe that's also why I have observed that when I work for some of the larger organizations, I'm going to try to thread this. I've got all the dots in my mind connected. I don't know if I'll get there. Okay, but there's a couple of things we left a lot of breadcrumbs for this. So one dot here is the practical limitation of, as your organization grows, you can't have a deep one-on-one relationship with everybody at your organization. So you have to find a way that it's I know there's probably a better term for this, but internally within Bella Grows, we talk about it being like a Ponzi scheme of positive influence as a leader. Like, you've got the people below you, you make a big difference for them, you coach them, you train them of how to be leaders, and then they affect their level down, they affect their level down. So there's a practical limitation in that you can't have that relationship with everybody within your organization. Okay. Then there's another part about industry growth and all of that. I've worked for very large organizations where the CEO, the C-suite, the executive team, good people, but they have an abstract view of their organization because they're not sitting down with a family member, commuting this emotional um, experience of like, man, it is a really, really different thing to conceptualize grief and to like be in the moment of a husband crying because he felt like he deserted his wife and his marriage vows, right? Like, it's a different tone of feeling that thing that your organization is responsible for. But up several layers, you only really have talking points. You can only manufacture the emotion around what we do. And people at the ground level who know families, residents, staff, you're not manufacturing anything, you're just living it day to day. And you have to, as a leader, you have to keep evolving and maturing because your work forces you to. But I felt it in my own presence, in my own professional timeline, low, where the longer I was away from the community level, the less I knew an actual person by relationship, and the more that I knew them as a name on a spreadsheet. I think I'm a good person, but there was a point in my career where it's like, everything about this work is abstract. It's not personal. And so I hope that, and maybe that's where my hope and my optimism is trying to lead towards, is I want more small business in our industry, because the people at the top that, I'll be honest, I'm criticizing um a lot of the big players. But I think about, man, I was on that trajectory myself, and I had to like recalibrate my life to be like, okay, I can't make this work abstract anymore. I've got to go find my local community and serve that community. So I don't know, maybe in a way I'm kind of circling back around to more of an empathetic view of people that I've criticized before, because they don't get to experience what you and I get to experience every day.
Yeah, so I have, just from a different perspective, I've
Mm,
acquired some businesses from entrepreneurs that were small enough and they could have had these personal
mm,
relationships
sure.
and they
Yeah.
didn't. So or they did
Yeah.
or they did and they were toxic, right? So
Yeah.
um I mean, I bought a business from a person that one time threw a person with dementia's furniture on the lawn and kicked them out.
Mhm. Mm.
Not like they got in a fight and just threw their furniture in my
Wow.
phone rings and they're like, hey, like, do you have an opening? Or the manager that, so I've seen some really challenging personalities in this business. And so
At every
I don't,
level.
I don't, yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
that, and I don't think that, and I do agree with you. I think they are doing what they're trying to figure out, but I don't think they're in the same business as we are.
Hmm.
It has the same
Yeah.
label, it has the same
Agreed.
name, it has the same consumer facing,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
fundamentally, if we're talking about, if you're managing a management operations company and you run buildings that are owned by somebody else, and you have a bunch of beds under your name and you have a lot of cachet, and you are sitting in a boardroom somewhere and you're doing all these things, and once a quarter, once every 6 months, once a year, you go through the communities, you take your photo opportunity, and you kind of mix some things up. You're not in the same business that we are,
Yeah, you're right.
because you're not they're they think they have answers, and that's how they proceed. And you and I both know that we just ask questions
Hmm.
and we try things and we experiment. And so, corporations don't really do that. Or if they do, they're like, this quarter, we're going to try this initiative. And, it's like it, but they can't really,
Mm.
have an open heart and be full throated with those efforts. And so it becomes corporate speak, and
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out how to scale up, in most cases, mediocre, affordable thing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just they're trying to be Walmart, and we're trying to be a bespoke, clothing
Yeah.
store,
Right.
and it's just not the same thing. And
Yeah. No, you're right.
and so it's they're trying to solve a different problem. And look, everybody in the world, if you were to ask everybody to a person what any market needs, they would all say we need more affordable assisted living, dementia care. That's what they would
Hmm.
say. Um, and there are people that are working on that problem. It's just not the problem that I'm trying to solve, and it's not the problem you're trying to solve. We're trying to solve the problem of, can someone actually create this personalized experience for a family and for a resident and for
Yeah.
a collection of people, 16 people or 20 people or whatever, and build a community that does all these things together and for each other. And that's just not the same thing as someone that has 10,000 beds, but they
Yeah.
manage someone else's building. Brookdale's
Yeah.
not asking those questions. No
Hmm.
criticism. We're just not in the same business.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've never articulated it that way. Um, and I think that's right. We're in the same industry, but we're not in the same business. Mm. Um, it almost makes me feel sad, for people who are in proximity to, the type of experiences that you and I could have, or the ones that we do have. And it is a good point, Lo, that it's not, that feeling of the work being abstract. It's not exclusive to people at large organizations. To your point, you can feel abstract about it, and you're the local owner of one single location. I have known people like that too. That um, it's a real estate player. It's just that they're buying cash flow. They're buying tax benefits. They're buying the benefit of a business, but not understanding that in order for you to realize those benefits into the long term, you have to actually do the day-to-day work. Yeah. Um, hmm.
Just so the audio is better, I'll say that I agree. But I was nodding my head very intently the whole time we were talking.
Yeah. This was, in the prep for our conversation today, you were talking about, I wanted to make sure we talked about it because I want to bring some awareness to it. And if we can help in this regard, I want to do it. So I know this was a tough weekend for you, man. And, we were just talking about on the heels of, uh, this work that we do helps us to be contemplative and self-reflective, get us through, some tough times and live through tough times. But I know, you shared a little bit about your partner's story with me when I was up there with you. Um, and so I'm sorry this was a tough weekend. Is this something that you want to reflect on, talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm finally in a place now, where I'm not the same person.
Yeah.
So 3 years ago, yesterday was the anniversary. So October 6th. So I don't know when the show is going to air, but
Hmm.
3 years ago, my business partner, who was kind of we had a capital raising firm together, and he was also
Yeah.
the general contractor for building Sage Oak Denton. So we formed a partnership, and the idea is that we were going to have Sage Oak campuses, neighborhoods all around DFW, and he was going to be on the construction side, and he was kind of just a brilliant guy, and we got along really well, and we were very complimentary, and he had a good team around him, so it just made sense
Hmm.
to kind of pair everything together. And he actually passed away in the middle of the project, and
Hmm.
it was suicide, and
Hmm.
when you're in the middle of and this is this big thing, and you have this
Yeah.
personally guaranteed debt, and like your entire life's work is like hinging in the balance,
Yeah.
and then at the same time your friend, your business partner, is now passed away,
Yeah.
and you have to figure out how to get through that. You're like, if I stop and I grieve and I mourn and I do all the normal things, that's not going to pay the mortgage to the bank.
Hmm.
Right. And so do I loot, so it's almost like you're making this decision, like, do I get in the grave with them?
Yeah.
And it's just incredibly hard. And then, of course, some of his family was his business partners, and it just created this thing where it's like, we're going to get this done because this can't all be in vain, and can't
Yeah.
do that. And what's interesting is about me, and I'll circle back to where I think his story plays a really interesting role in all this. Is 2 weeks ago, I started underwriting what I consider to be a distressed portfolio, and
Hmm.
it's the first time in the last 3 years that I've looked at playing offense, meaning
Hmm.
that I'm actually looking to grow Sage Oak as opposed
Yeah.
to defensively trying to, basically correct and solve the problems for decisions that I made 5 years ago.
Yeah.
When you start a development project and when you do these things, and you're trying to, you're trying to get to cash flow neutrality, and you're trying to create this, you're trying to win best of awards. You're trying to do all these
Hmm.
things and build this amazing team, but it is defense.
Yeah.
It's defense in the sense that you've done this project and you're not growing and you're not expanding, and you're capped on your ability to innovate, because innovation requires money. Innovation requires rethinking your physical plant, and these are things you can't do for things that you've already
Yeah.
built. And so a couple weeks ago, I started doing that, and I got a chance to really imagine
Hmm.
what it would be like for the first time in the last 3 years to do what I started doing, which was to innovate and to do
Yeah.
different concepts and different ideas. And so when I say I'm kind of in a different place now, I think what I would always recognize is if this was the last thing that I did, and I'm like, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to get this project to safety, and then I'm going to grow no more, then that would have my answer. But I
Yeah.
got really excited, and the spark came back to expand and to grow and to continue to innovate.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, to have the company, essentially, well, I started the company because my dad died.
Yeah.
I got divorced while I was running Sage Oak. My mother died while I was running Sage Oak, and my business partner, in the middle of a project in which he was the key person at the time, died in the middle of the project. And
Yeah.
so when I say that I've had a lot of life events in the 9 years that I've been running the company, I mean that. And when I say that it's just been
Mm.
Sage Oak and my dog, I
Yeah.
mean that.
Yeah.
And I've navigated natural disasters. I've done all those things, but this particular situation with my partner Austin, it really did. It was probably the most significant business event that ever happened in my life, because um, you're you're alone in a
Yeah.
way,
Hmm.
and and when you deal with something like suicide, and when you deal with something, there's so much stigma around it. But then it
Right.
really boils down to mental health.
Hmm.
And what is dementia but a phase of mental health?
Hmm.
And so,
Hmm.
um, you know, thankfully, I had the personal tools and the
Yeah.
professional tools to, we ask caregivers every day to, like, okay, your favorite resident died. See you on your shift tomorrow. And it was like, I had to model that behavior. I had to call all my team and say, hey, like, this happened. And
Yeah.
they're like, well, you're not working today. And I'm like, well, we got to like, no, you're not working today.
Mm-hmm.
Just clear your head, do whatever you have to do and whatever you need. And, so it's just so important to be reminded that, this is a business of joy. And I know your company motto, and it's a business of
Mm-hmm.
happiness. And then some days it's not.
Yeah.
And some days it's tragic. And we still have to do the job in spite of that tragedy. And
Mm-hmm.
and so that was, I said to myself, if I ever grow and expand again after this happened, then I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And it took me 3 years to get to that place. And so,
Mm.
I know that you offered to put the information in the show notes. And so, every year when we celebrate the anniversary on October 6th of his passing, we raise money for the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Specifically, it's NAMI, NAMI, National Alliance
Mm-hmm.
of Mental Illness, specifically the North Texas chapter. And we find that they do really, really good work. And so I donated some money to them yesterday in honor. And if any of your show viewers are so captivated that they would like to donate, or if they've had mental illness touch their lives, or because of their work in the dementia space, or even if they faced suicide in their family or friend network, just donating the money to mental health resources is such an important opportunity. And so thank you for allowing me to do that. It's you find out a lot about yourself in moments
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I'm really proud of so many people in his family and in our company that had to answer the bell when we really didn't want to, and we didn't really have the energy. But so we persisted and we persevered. I think that place in Denton will always be kind of an ode to his legacy. And it's something that we're very proud of, and that, we want to see successful, not, in its own right, but we want to see successful because of the symbolism of what it represents when you have a business partner and a friend pass away in the middle of the project.
Yeah. I really appreciate, hearing more of that, and, your your early, our earlier conversation in this episode about, um, how can you not feel romantic about the work that we do? How can you not feel, a deep gravity, of what I said it earlier, like cosmically, but yeah, I mean, we're entangled in this kind of universe of relationships and understanding our own life and compartmentalizing and grieving in real time, but also running a business. And but if you really think about all of those things that, um what we do, what we live through in our own lives, we also professionally do for other people. It's like this, it's a strange, like, meeting point of life and work and purpose and healing. And yeah, it's, sorry to know that, about your friend. And so I will get to hit the send. Earlier you said you're the guy who, hit send, and I'll do that myself. And I hope, for listeners here, that, while, we didn't intend for this to be like a main purpose of the episode, if you feel so called, to donate, I think that'd be an amazing thing to happen from this episode. And beyond that, I think we all are finding the value of being able to talk about stuff. Dementia carries a stigma, suicide carries a stigma. There's so many things that we deal with, in our work, in our lives, that in a lot of ways we're bringing light to these topics to be able to talk about them, and say,
Geriatrics carries a stigma, right? Like
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot,
all of it.
so, we're operating on this very critical place in society that is
Yeah.
also kind of fringe in America.
Hmm.
And it's, yeah, I think, I think, when it comes to all this, if someone were to ask me, like, how do you know if you're the operator or whoever runs the assisted living or memory care company, how do you know they're going to do a good job? And I would say,
Yeah.
look for a person that's been through things themselves,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of businesses that close up when someone passes away.
Yeah.
There's a lot of projects that don't get completed.
Yeah.
when someone passes away, and maybe they should. But ultimately, my point in all that is if you can find somebody that's been through some things, that has gone through loss themselves, and
Yeah.
then still come to work to take care of your loved one, to lead the team, to take care of your loved one, then you can probably count on them in a hurricane. You can probably count on them
Yeah.
in an ice storm. You can probably count on them in a power outage,
Yeah.
because they've proven that, whether it be personal loss or professional loss, or whatever, that the mission comes first.
Yeah.
And that's just something that I've learned about myself. And there are very few professions where loss happens and you show up to work the next day,
Yeah.
but this is one of them. And
Yeah.
that's just baked in. And so we're at the intersection of life and death. We're at the intersection of when joy turns into offering a
Hmm.
noble end of life. And
Yeah.
but, so to your point, that's where all the romanticized, that's where all this stuff kind of comes together, is that
Hmm.
I'm going to be better at my job because that happened to me. I don't wish that it happened. I don't wish that it would have taken place. But if I can get better and I can be a better version of myself
Mm.
because that happened, then that's a gift that I can give to other people in perpetuity, for as
Yeah.
long as I'm doing this and as long as I'm alive.
Yeah. This is something that I usually tag on at the end of my podcast episodes, and this conversation, this point in our conversation, made me think about it. I end the episodes by saying, "Live your legacy today," and this is actually what I mean. It's hard to explain it without all the pros, but you and I have set it up for this. I think a lot about legacy. I don't know where it kind of entered my psyche. It was a long time ago, but this idea of, um, one, are we living in our purpose, and then two, if we are, what is the impact that we make beyond our own lives? And um, we have both lost people close to us that in if we're just thinking chronologically, we've lost people way too soon. And then you think about, well, how does legacy work? It Somebody could live 100 years and not leave a lasting legacy or an impact beyond, maybe a small circle, and yet others who are gone too early might leave a pretty big imprint. And for me and my dad, when he died in 2021 at the age of 61, um, I didn't think, I didn't think he was going to have much of a legacy. He's an immigrant from South Korea. He ran a gas station, in a small town in South Texas. He didn't do anything remarkable. And in the course of his cancer treatments and then his dying process, he and we had a chance to reconcile about a lot of things. I thought we'd have 10, 20, 30, 40 years to go through all of that, but we had to compress it down into a pretty short amount of time. um, Lots of long stories made a little bit shorter here. I've realized that my dad really, he's making quite an impact. His legacy is pretty big because of what his sons are doing. And you know, one thing I'm learning right now in this phase of my life is actually not to worry too much about all of those ripples. I still think about legacy, but with Bella Groves and Think Tank and other things that I get to do now, it really is just about how authentically can I do things in my life? How authentically can I show up as a small business owner in senior living for Bella Groves? How authentically can I, do something like the Think Tank gathering? And when given an opportunity to connect with somebody one on one, I think about how many people I've met in this profession that I haven't had even close to the depth of conversations that you and I have had. And I think, man, I'm really enjoying this time of my life right now where everything is becoming smaller and more intimate, and I think it's such a richer way to live and work.
Well, you're definitely making an impact, and I definitely agree. I don't know. You said sons. I don't know your brothers or
Hmm.
brother. It could be one or two. Or how many brothers
One,
do you have?
yeah.
One brother. Okay, so
One-
I don't know your
yeah,
brother.
one
So
brother.
we'll have to maybe do a separate show about him. But
Yeah.
um, yeah. My dad was a very interesting person. Some might
Hmm.
describe him as an outlaw, and you wouldn't
Hmm.
be wrong, both technically and spiritually wrong about my
Yeah.
dad being an outlaw. So for me to carry this mantle that I carry, that's so far removed from anything that my dad ever did, I think maybe the thing I took away from him is he was himself, and he
Hmm.
just wanted me to be myself. And
Yeah.
we have a lot in common, but we have a lot of unique differences.
Yeah.
I definitely have an outlaw flair to how I run Sage Oak, and I
Hmm.
hire a lot of people with an outlaw flair. But it's because we fundamentally think that our version of hope sometimes is throwing a Molotov cocktail to the front door of a place and
Hmm.
starting over and building something. Letting the phoenix rise from the ashes. These are
Yeah.
metaphorical. We have not firebombed any assisted living and memory care facilities.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the point is that I think the industry needs to be jarred awake and it needs to be shocked. And people, sitting in a boardroom somewhere need to figure out, like, well, how are they doing this? Why are they filling faster than us? Why are they charging more money than
Yeah.
us? Why are they able to get these outcomes? Why do they have better Google reviews than us?
Yeah.
And I think that's our kind of common mission is that if we, I don't have any interest in being that big in this business.
Right. Me
Um,
too.
but if I can be big enough that I get noticed and I can
Yeah.
influence some things, then now we start having second, third, fourth order impacts, and in your dad's legacy, you're a second. You're a first order
Hmm.
impact of your dad's legacy, and everything you do is a second order impact of your dad's
Right.
legacy, and then so on and so forth. So I think you're right. Our dads collectively and anybody's can have a really big influence based on how they parented their kids and what their kids turned out to do.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of again, a lot of just life philosophy playing out, in the work that we do. Yeah, I agree with you. I hope that we have enough success that we can go speak at conferences. You and I were at one together. I'm sure we'll be at others. I don't go to a lot. You don't go to a lot, and I think at this point it's really about the value I get from these gatherings are less about generic networking and being anywhere cool, but it's really about am I going to be given a platform to talk about things of consequence, and so I hope I get to see you and your cowboy hat on stage a little bit more, because I do think that you have a knack for the when I first met you, I thought, you've got all the intellectual parts of the business, and what I've been really delighted to get to know over time is how much of the heart you have of the business. And I don't know if that's what you were meaning earlier of maybe that it surprised you too, about you were saying you thought you'd take kind of the easy routes of let me do this, let me make some money and keep going, but I talk about it a lot as head and heart. Like you, when I first met you, I was like, man, he's got all the head stuff in spade. But I was like, I don't know about any of the heart stuff, because the only thing I ever talk to him about is like the head stuff. And but I've gotten to know a lot of the heart stuff, and I think you know the more that we have leaders and operators in our industry who are combining the two, yeah, I mean, I think there's a case to be made for optimism.
Well, thank you, and it was really fun to have this conversation with you. Obviously, and always a pleasure. And
Yeah.
since you're starting this amazing conference and I can't attend this year, if you're so intent on seeing this cowboy hat on the stage, you'll just have to
That's
invite me
right.
to have a topic to speak next year. So that'll,
That's right.
2025, here we come. So
Well, you and I may come up with something together.
I think we can
All
find an
right.
idea.
Yeah, if Lo, if we don't cut ourselves off, we'll have another 3 hour conversation like we did before. I hope that for listeners, wherever you kind of found some value in this conversation, share it with other people. Talk about things that we talked about, but people in your own circle. And I really enjoyed getting to see you, buddy. Thanks for hopping on with me for Level Up.
Yeah, I had a great time, and look forward to seeing the finished product and what value it brings to the industry.
It'll be done pretty soon, and a lot faster than the audio recording, I promise. For everybody, thanks for tuning in for this episode of Level Up. Have an amazing day. Live your legacy today. All right. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Level Up Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and its YouTube channel. Better yet, share it with someone you know who is on their own leadership development journey. I hope you'll be back for the next episode of Level Up. But until then, I hope that you are leading well, and remember that you are living your legacy today. So, make it a good one.